On the next Flashpoint, is there a better way to elect our leaders in America? And what is that green ooze on I-696?
Flashpoint today at 10, only on Local 4.
The biggest New Year's blowout sale ever continues at Art Van Pure Sleep. Get the lowest price on top name brand mattresses with up to $1,000 off, plus 0% financing up to 72 months. Like Beauty Rest Black and Tempur-Pedic at $28 a month, plus free next day delivery, free power base upgrades, free TVs, $300 gift cards. Nobody has a better price on Sealy at $398, Beauty Rest at $498. The New Year's blowout sale continues only at Art Van Furniture and all Pure Sleep stores.
This is how you go home and have joy.
Yes.
Because you give so much to these wonderful people.
Ellen, weekdays at 3 on Local 4.
From worries over radioactive spillage to strange goop showing up on the interstate, do we know what's in the earth, wind, and water? Candace Miller isn't so sure. We'll talk it over with her. And is there a better way to vote? We'll talk about innovations in democracy. Today is Sunday, January 5th, 2020, and this is Flashpoint.
Hi, welcome to Flashpoint. As we come to you with our first Flashpoint broadcast of 2020, I hope your new year is off to a good start. We are, of course, now officially into the new election year, one that is seen far and wide as having enormous implications for the future of the country. A little later on, we're going to dig into not only the politics of the year ahead, but we'll wonder at whether there's a better way. Detroiter is the publication from the Detroit Regional Chamber, and their recent issue poses a number of such questions. Questions like, should primaries be open to all voters regardless of their party affiliation? Should we think about what's known as ranked choice voting? Are there ways to connect voters in a more vital way to the process? We're going to ponder those questions coming up a little later on. But up first, I want to dig into that green ooze that has been leaking onto I-696, apparently since at least 2016. I don't really want to dig into it. I don't want to touch it. It turns out it's hexavalent chromium. If you ever saw the film Aaron Brockovich with Julia Roberts, you already know hexavalent chromium is vile and dangerous stuff. And it's one of several glaring worries that we've had lately, like whether radioactive material was leaching into the Detroit River, or what happens if Canada starts stockpiling its radioactive waste along the Lake Huron shoreline. Do we have any idea right now what's in the water or in the dirt or the roads or the air? Macomb County Public Works Commissioner Candace Miller has been hopping mad about that green ooze, which she feels is destined for Lake St. Clair. She's up first today on Flashpoint. Green ooze that showed up on I-696 is in Oakland County. It was from an Oakland County business, but it's the Public Works Commissioner from neighboring Macomb County who's been the fiercest critic of the state's response. And Candace Miller is here to talk about it this morning. Good to have you back on the program.
Thanks, Devin. Delighted to be here.
Why are you the one raising all of the ruckus on this?
Well, I don't know, really. I mean, hopefully other people will engage. I think they are now. But I mean, I'm, of course, always thought of myself as an advocate for the people of Michigan in regards to protecting our magnificent Great Lakes. And this green ooze, the chromium-6, as I call it, it has an opportunity, unfortunately, to travel down, to migrate down 11 Mile, 696 11 Mile, which discharges at the end of 11 Mile into Lake St. Clair. Well,
as I mentioned off the top, this has been leaching for now maybe 3-4 years or longer. The Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, which is sort of the replacement now for the MEDQ, they are saying that there is no danger of it reaching Lake St. Clair. Why don't you believe their take on that?
I don't think they're saying that anymore. Basically, what they said is by the time it gets there, it'll be so diluted you don't have to worry about it anymore. And of course, I said dilution is not a solution. I couldn't believe they actually did say that. That's not the correct response. However, as this thing has evolved, we've now seen what has happened with this particular site, which there was about $1.5 million of EPA Superfund dollars spent on a cleanup, which I think you could categorize honestly as inadequate. And then the EPA turned it over to, at that time, the MDEQ, now EGLE. And they said, you know, it's up to the state. And the state, as early as this spring, so it's been through 2 administrations. Yeah. So I'm not trying to point a finger here, but this is what's happened. The same people are still in in the bureaucracy there, and they said they didn't really think that there was a danger of this migrating off-site, and so they told the EPA they didn't need any more Superfund monies.
Which is interesting. So
Really?
this came from a business called Electroplating Services. They've already, with the owner of the company doing a year in jail. So
Yes.
there's already a realization that this was hazardous waste that was being handled improperly. The response to it seems lacking in your view.
There's obviously a problem there somewhere in the bureaucracy, and so you know, I would respectfully call on the governor. I mean, to tell you the truth, when she reorganized, when she took office and made this department the new EGLE from the MDEQ,
I think they call it Eagle, but you like Eggle.
Well, there's no A
in it.
There's no A, so EGLE, I don't know, whatever they are. It's the same people, right?
Yeah.
And I just said, you know, look, I think this is good, what you're doing here. I mean, I'm all about the Office of the Great Lakes being moved under the Department of the Environment. It all made sense to me. But, you know, I do think that there needs to be a deep dive in that department because they do need a culture change.
This has been really interesting for a lot of us, I think, watching you make the transition from someone who was in Congress to this new public works, to your new life in public works. And I think a lot of people thought that maybe you thought you were sort of retiring to an easier life. It's been insane from the sinkhole right on through. And now you find all of these, because so much of Macomb County is on the shoreline, you find all of these issues that are popping up right now that go to the very heart of Michigan's greatest resource, which is its fresh water. How much trouble do you think we're in with our custodianship of it? Going back, looking at Flint, we've had this issue where we thought there might be radioactive material being leached into the Detroit River recently, and now we watch as Canada's trying to figure out if they're going to put their nuclear waste up on the other side of the Lake Huron shoreline, right across from you.
I think those are all serious issues. I mean, I look at sort of my job almost by using all of these things that we are finding just in Macomb County. It's amazing what you can find if you look. You know, so first of all, we have to make sure that we are really doing a very comprehensive evaluation and inspection of all these different things, whether it's in the county level or across the state of Michigan or nationally or binationally as well. But I think we can use them all as a teachable moment really to sort of raise the awareness, the public awareness of the kinds of challenges that we are facing environmentally. And look, the Great Lakes is... It's not just our national treasure here, it's an international treasure. 20% of the drinking water supply of the entire planet. So it is so important, and we, all of us, have not been the best stewards of it over the years, and we need to do a better job.
How concerned are you about the PFAS problem, which we keep learning more and more? Michigan is seen almost as a leader in this because we've responded to it more quickly.
That's right.
I think some people mistake that as meaning that we've got a bigger problem. Mm-hmm. This is a problem all over the place.
All over the place, and all of us have it in us. I mean, if your mother used a Teflon pan and all the Teflon flaked, I mean, I remember that with scrambled eggs. It looked like there was pepper in there, but we're eating it.
Anything designed to keep something from sticking to it certainly is built on PFAS.
Yeah, they're forever chemicals.
Yeah.
So, you know, the trick is, I think, to all of this, don't get overwhelmed by it all. I mean, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So, you know, that's been my approach to this job and other jobs that I've had. You have to look and think about an issue, and then you just keep working it, right? You just keep working it, because now we're talking about the green ooze, but we have a number of different things that we've been dealing with in Macomb County. I have one of the largest gas stations in the state of Michigan where we found a whole bunch of diesel that was leaking. It looked like the Beverly Hillbillies bubbling up from the bottom of our drains, coming out the banks. And we are now undertaking a multi-million-dollar project to excavate all of this. And we found where it all was coming from. So, you know, it's just one
this
thing
is
at a
just
time.
A problem that you're lucky enough to see.
Because
how many problems are out there that
look.
But how many problems are out there that we can't see?
Yeah, no, that's right.
Especially in the post-industrial world, where there's so much of the stuff that was there for years.
That's true, and it's everywhere. And then, you know, whether it's in the city of Detroit or Philadelphia or New York or whatever, the old industrial cities have all kinds of issues. It just was a different time, and nobody really thought about it. But now we're thinking about it. We need to look, you know, think about it smartly and look for some of these things and then address them as best that we can.
Lastly, we've watched the Michigan congressional delegation with its fight with the White House over funding for Great Lakes restoration money, and it's been a real struggle.
Yeah, but I don't think it will be anymore. And you notice this last budgetary cycle that not only did the president's budget call for the money for the GLRI, as we call it, there was actually a plus up. So I think there's been recognition that it's very important, and that is certainly a bipartisan issue, not just here in Michigan, but all of the congressional delegations in the 8 Great Lakes states, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, Independents, everybody is on that. So that's very important.
While I've got you here, the next segment, we're going to start talking about ways to change, if there are things that we should be doing about changing our elections. You're the former Secretary of State. Give me just a quick thought on if there were things that you think that we should do to really change, to create a better system so that voters feel that they're more a part of it, more engaged, and that their views are being represented more fairly. Is there anything off the top of your head that you think would help?
Well, you know, I used to do everything I could to get the younger people to engage and to vote. And no matter what we did, you know, it's just something.
They typically don't turn out right in numbers.
There. But one thing I think we might want to take a look at is our primary date here in Michigan. Now, I'm not talking about the national elections, but from Michigan's perspective, you know, our primaries in August, and people are on vacation, right? Or they're whatever they're doing. They're not thinking about politics all the time. So some states have them as early as March, others are into the end of September, and I'm not quite sure what the right date is, but that possibly could increase participation.
Yeah.
Although, you know, we have one of the highest percentages of people who are eligible to vote, registered to vote in Michigan, but yet we never break the national average.
We don't get out there, yeah, exactly.
Vote.
Yeah. We'll bring that up among other things here in the next segment. Thanks very much for being here, Candace. Really appreciate it. We come back, we'll talk more about is there a better way forward as we begin our headlong ascent into a new election year. This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
Biggest New Year's blowout sale ever continues at Art Van Furniture. Huge doorbusters on accent chairs, $98. Sofas, $498. Sealy Queen, $398. The New Year's blowout sale continues only at Art Van Furniture. Going on now.
More than 2.5 million Americans are addicted to opioids. The addiction is sometimes developed through the improper use of prescription painkillers. Using prescribed medication in ways or amounts not intended by a doctor is very dangerous. So it's important that unused prescriptions are properly disposed of. If you or someone you know is struggling with addiction, or for more information about prevention, treatment, and recovery services, or how to properly dispose of medication, contact the Detroit Wayne Integrated Health Network, 24/7, 800-241-4949. Here to talk, here to help.
Is your house cold and drafty? Are your energy bills through the roof? With Michigan's winter being so unpredictable, you cannot afford not to insulate your home another winter. Stop bleeding money. Insulate your walls and attic. Cut your energy bill up to 50% with Ace & Sons.
History has its heroes and villains. Sometimes one man is both. Hoffa. Don't miss Shattered Season 4, Hoffa, available now wherever you get your podcasts. Sponsored by Tubby Sub Shops.
Art Van Furniture is kicking off the new year with our biggest New Year's blowout sale ever. With free Keurigs, free TVs, free adjustable power bases. The New Year's blowout sale, only at Art Van Furniture and Mattress.
The defenders get results.
A certain type of guardrail that could be a potentially deadly hazard.
A guardrail pierced her car and she was killed instantly.
Defender Karen Drew first exposed the problem.
Defenders have learned these guardrails are used in the state, most of them right here in Metro Detroit.
And other states have had issues.
And the state decided to take action.
Crews out making repairs to local guardrails.
The Local 4 defenders know how to get results.
Because your moments matter.
Need something investigated? Contact the defenders.
It is 2020. The Iowa caucuses, believe it or not, are now a month away. So we are marching into the election basically the way we always do. But is there a better way? Is there a way of connecting voters to the process that's more engaging, more representative of where Americans stand on the issues and the candidates? These are the questions posed by this recent issue of Detroiter, which is a publication from the Detroit Regional Chamber, and it asks some very provocative questions. Let's talk about that this morning with my roundtable political consultant, Adolph Mongo from Mongo & Associates. Adolph, good to have you back with us. Dennis Darnoy is back with us as well from Densar Consulting, a former Detroit City Councilwoman who is now now basically obsessed with voter education. Sheila Cockrell is here, and from the Detroit Regional Chamber, their CEO, Sandy Barua. Sandy, this is really interesting. I'm wondering, before we dig into this, does this feel like a think tank exercise that we often do, or can we see a way to really create change in the way we hold American elections?
Well, that's the question we're posing. I mean, as the chamber, we have not taken positions on these different voting systems that are out there and that are being tried by different parts of the country and actually different parts of the world. But we want to pose some questions, and these questions were posed up at the Mackinac Policy Conference last spring by Professor Michael Porter from Harvard and Catherine Gale, his research colleague. And we think it's a really interesting question because when you look at the United States as a whole, just under 30% of all voters are registered Republicans, just over 30% of all voters are Democrats, but almost 40% are independents. But how often do you see independents getting elected? So there's clearly a mismatch between what the individual voters are looking for, asking for, and what the political industry, if you will, is providing the voters.
It's interesting. Sheila, we're at that time of year right now. I don't know how many different online conversations I have with people who want to tell me that the media picks who our candidates are. Why can't a third-party candidate ever really get any traction in America? All these frustrations that bubble up, and yet I think, as Sandy is starting to suggest here, the system is very reliant on it staying the way it is because it's very profitable for a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree, and I really salute the chamber for their leadership on pushing this conversation because it is an important one. Are there other ways to engage people more directly and more personally in the process of choosing leadership? It's a moribund system. It's been this way in this country for a very long time. You have the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and the fringes, and that's in a sense, that's the sandbox. That is not encouraging or permitting many voices to be heard. What percentage of people are going to vote in this presidential preference primary? Who knows that it's on March 10th? That we got two primaries this year and a general election. A very small group of highly engaged people are going to make this election. That is not democracy.
If you could wave a magic wand, it'd often change things that we do right now that would create a more engaged electorate. What do you think?
I thought East Point started. I like how they did their mayoral election, city council. You know, Ann Arbor had that in 1975, instant runoff voting, where Al Wheeler, the first black elected as mayor of Ann Arbor, where people picked two. This is my number one choice, this is my number two
ranked
choice.
Voting system.
But you know what happened after that when he got elected? The parties said, no, we can't have this. You know what? And so they worked. And 2 years later, they repealed it. But I think you got to have something that's different. And I thought East Point, even though it was criticized, said, why are they doing that? You pick one and then you pick the second and third. I think you get people engaged.
That's the way the state of Maine actually does it, Dennis. This ranked voting system where you go through and you rank the people on the ballot by choice, and then one by one they're winnowed out, with the vote then getting recalculated each time. Does that make sense as a way to do it?
I mean, it's a approach, but there are problems with it, practical problems. Number one, look at our Democratic presidential primary here in Michigan. You've got 14 candidates. Are we going to go through all 14 and rank, 1 through 14? Second of all, we already complain about the amount of time it takes to get through a polling location and the amount of time people have to stay in lines. So if you're now ranking 14 candidates, 1 through 14, you're going to increase the line.
You'd be sitting there a while.
But they do it in Louisiana now because they have primaries where Republicans, Democrats all run in one primary. If you don't get a majority, you don't get 50%, you have a runoff with the two. So what's the difference?
Well, the places that are trying ranked choice voting are voting. Excuse me, say that 3 times fast. It really they only limit to your top 3. So you wouldn't have to do 14. Right. And you still have the option of just selecting one. If you just want to say, so and so, Jane Doe is my candidate, and that's the only candidate I want to vote for. You could still walk into a voting booth and still just do the one if that's what you wanted to do.
Certainly, but there was a study going back. San Francisco did that in 2004, and there was a study showing that voters voters with lower education, African American voters, Latino voters didn't follow 1 through 3. They just basically went 1 or 2. And the more educated voters would go in and they'd fill in the candidates completely ranked, which in some ways gives them.
What are you saying? Those voters not prepared to, when you said prepared voters, African American voters, etc. People know who they're going to vote for, and there's no question.
I don't think choosing not to do 3 or 4 choices means you're not prepared. It may mean you're very clear on what
This is what I want my vote to say.
I think anything that encourages all of us to make more informed decisions is a strategy we should try. And if you're ranking people, you have to think about them differently than if you're just saying, oh, the Dems say this is our person, and the Republicans say this is our.
But wouldn't you agree that someone who fills it out, that vote essentially counts more than the individual who only votes for 1 or 2 people?
Which also becomes incumbent on the voter. I mean, that is a way to flex your opinion and your muscle, maybe make it count more. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, though, should voters from any party be allowed to vote in primaries, or should they stay party-only affairs? This is Flashpoint on Local 4.
Forgotten Harvest is a lifesaver for a mother like myself with children and having so many snacks and lunches to make.
The food from Forgotten Harvest make me feel better in school.
Because these children around this community really look for Forgotten Harvest. And I thank Forgotten Harvest for helping me and my family out. Forgotten Harvest needs your support to help families in need.
We need your help today.
It's 3 a.m. in the Bronx, New York. I'm on the corner of 187th and Belmont Avenue. This was my neighborhood. This is a Bronx tale.
A real tale of family, loyalty, and love. It's Jersey Boys meets West Side Story. See A Bronx Tale, the hit Broadway musical, right in your own neighborhood.
January 21st through February 2nd at the Fisher Theater. Get your tickets now at BroadwayInDetroit.com.
How's it going, hon?
Oh, it's going.
I believe y'all. Everything gonna be alright.
I'm Mike Morse, and I believe in this town. If you've been injured, you call me.
855 Mike wins.
And let's go for the win.
Tonight, it's Golden Globes night. Those red carpet A-listers are looking their best. If you're inspired to be the best you can be, but strict diets and limited options make you say, no way. If you've tried it all, what else can you do?
I'll show you the new trend in eating. See how it could finally help you lose weight, improve your health, and actually enjoy what you eat.
This is a good health report that may help you look better and feel better. Tonight on Local 4 News at 11 after the Golden Globes.
Welcome back to Flashpoint. As we head into this big election year, we're talking about whether or not there are ways to actually improve the way that we carry out our votes. Sandy, I think it's been frustrating to many, many people. For so many years, the states of Iowa and New Hampshire have seemed to have an outsized kind of power over the process. But let's talk in general about the primaries themselves. Should there be, for instance, a national primary to begin with? Should everybody voting on the same day? Secondly, should primaries be open to every voter, or is it really about the party's voters deciding who their flag bearer is going to be?
That's a lot to unpack. I'm going to.
Can you get to all that?
Yeah, in 10 seconds or less. So, in terms of Iowa and New Hampshire playing an outsized role in our presidential process, obviously there's a lot of problems with that in terms of kind of the demographics of those two states. However, one of the reasons why they started with small states is to allow candidates that aren't nationally known, like Jimmy Carter in 1976, to gain some traction and to catapult themselves into the national. So if you did a national primary, or if you did like a regional primary, you would then be cutting out the Jimmy Carters, the future Jimmy Carters out there, or potentially even the future Barack Obamas that weren't necessarily all that well known, but were able to ignite a spark in a smaller state.
I can get the beauty of that, but Sheila, it's not just an Iowa primary. These are the caucuses, which are a very strange system. These meetings, it's very elaborate, and it's interesting that has that kind of outsized power.
I totally agree, and I think over time it's become clear that it is not really representative of even of the nation and sort of national trends as an approach. I think it's fine, it can happen, but it shouldn't set the stage for the rest of the country, and that's what needs to be addressed. The other part of it, though, is while there's a great deal of frustration on people's parts about the party-related pieces of this, I think we really cannot not acknowledge the role that Citizen United and dark money has played in altering the shape of all of these choices that people get to make. That, I think, is as big a problem.
It's hard to argue that. Adolph, would it make more sense if these primaries were open, or should the Democrats be relying on just Democratic voters to decide who the Democratic candidates are?
I think, you know what, you can say yeah, and then you get a George Wallace type situation in 1972 where Republicans crossed over and voted overwhelmingly for George Wallace.
Yeah.
But I think people should be able to vote in any primary, whether they Democrats, Republicans, or independents. Judge Victoria Roberts in federal court say, you know what, get rid of that 30,000 signature requirement for independents and make it 12 so we can get independents on the ballot. So you got to have a third party, or you got to have people that's not Republicans or Democrats.
Dennis, it's funny. I've mentioned some of the conversations I'm having online with people right now. A frustration I hear every election year is that third-party candidates, what I hear a lot from people is that the media doesn't give third-party candidates a chance. Sure. I would actually argue the opposite. I think the media pays more attention to third-party candidates than voters often end up doing. But we're just a two-party nation, and that's how it was really designed to be, and that's it? Or should we be finding a way for third parties to have better life, more life?
I think we would have to restructure our entire electoral system in order to accommodate what's more like a European system of government, where you have multiple parties forming coalition government.
Parliamentary republic, yes.
I mean, there's a lot of structural change that would have to go into creating a system far more open than what we have right now.
But to Sandy's, well, you were saying earlier, if 40% of the people are independents.
Why not? And so what's preventing independents from succeeding? One, since the Democratic and the Republican Party, and I spent most of my career on the Republican side, electing Republican candidates, so I know how the game is played. There is barriers that the Democratic and Republican parties have put up to any other party from getting in. Adolph mentioned the signature barrier, right? Ballot access is a huge issue. Democrats and Republicans have automatic guaranteed position on the ballot in all 50 states. Independents have to scrape for it. Yeah. Even the contribution limits are different. If you want to give to an independent candidate, there's a much lower legal threshold that you're able to give to that independent candidate or independent party than to a Republican candidate, Democratic candidate, or one of the parties.
We've got about 20 seconds left for you to wait.
I just think for democracy to work, people need to participate. We should open it up. It shouldn't be, the process shouldn't be controlled by any two parties. Everybody should have the right to have their voice heard.
It should all be designed for the doors to swing open rather than shut. Thank you all very much for being here. A lot to think about as we head into, as I mentioned, what will no doubt be a very consequential and big year in politics. Thanks so much for being here. Meet the Press coming up next, right after Mitch Albom's Heart of Detroit. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time right back here with Flashpoint.